prism will be the right square. So the bottom is a square and we're just taking it up a little bit further. So to start anew, I can close this out. The computer systems now probably don't have to close these, but there's going to come a point to where we'll have so many open files that we will want to close these as we go, or if we're working in the assemblies, we don't want too much open taking up resources in the system. So I'm doing the file pull down this time, which is the same as going over to the new icon. It's going to take me back into the part. I'm still in inches. I haven't set my template yet for the origin, but I do want to see that. So this time, instead of going to the front plane, I'm going to go to the top plane, and I can sketch directly from that pop-up. And if I don't get the pop-up, then I can right mouse button. We're going to go into the sketch. That was actually a left mouse button. Let's see, the right mouse button comes up with the in context. So very top, hover over it, it tells me that it's a sketch, takes me into the sketch. The option to rotate into the view, come up to the little gear, we go to the sketch and auto rotate normal 2. That will bring us right into the plane that we're sketching in. All right, so this time, instead of using the lines, we'll use the rectangle tool. Each of these has an arrow next to it, so the corner rectangle, a center rectangle, a 3-point, 3-point center, or 3-point corner, 3-point center, and a parallelogram. We're going to stay with just the corner. If I decide I picked wrong, that I want to try one of the other ones, I can come over to the property manager and pick those. Again, we can see the parameters, but I don't really want to use those. So as I'm dragging around, this time instead of starting away from the origin, I'm going to make sure that I pick up that coincidence, left click and hold down, or if you prefer the click, you will click on the origin and then let go, and then click where you want it to finish at. So our square, and there again, it is a constant habit. Let me go ahead and apply that one and I'll tell you what I did. So apply the 2 inches, and as I'm still in the dimension, I'm going to hit escape real quick and get out of that. Alright, so if I right click on that line, on the context menu I will get a smart dimension. If I just highlight it, then I will get the pop-up to go to a smart dimension, and I can always come over to the command manager and pick its smart dimension. So we're going to select the line, and then click again to place the dimension, and then set the 2-inch for our value. Coming over to features and extrude. This one's going to be a little bit taller, so maybe I'll go to 3 inches. If you want to work with the scales, so I'm still holding down my left mouse button, and let's see, I'm looking for that 3 inches, and this just takes a little bit longer. If I'm further away, I get a larger increment, and then as it becomes closer, I'm going to shrink to a smaller increment, and I'm going to be able to get to 3 inches. Doing all of that, I could have just typed in 3 inches and been done with it, and been pretty happy with it. So this is my, get my terminology straight, this is my right square. So I'm going to go ahead and save. And then I want to reuse this geometry to be the rectangular, well, I should have looked at that geometry to the right rectangular. And we're going to use a double click that is going to show all of my dimensions for this geometry. So as we go to our visual clues, I'm 2 inches by 2 inches by 3 inches. The 2 inches in black are for the sketch. The 3 inches in blue is for the and I'm just double clicking on the feature again. The 3 inches is for the feature. If I double click on the solid, I'll also get the same result. But depending on how complex the geometry is, I always feel a little bit more comfortable coming over and picking exactly what I'm looking for in the way of that geometry. So I want to make this a right rectangular, and to do that we're going to go 4 inches, and so all I did was double click, and we'll do that again and hit OK, and nothing happened. So the little stoplights next to the feature and to the sketch tell me that I need to rebuild. And when I hover over the rebuild, it shows me Control B. And there is also a Control Q that if the geometry is really complicated, it will force the rebuild of all of the geometry. All right, so let's go back. If I double click on the sketch, and maybe I want to go to 3 on this one. We'll go to 4 on the vertical, and by double clicking and overwriting those geometries, when I hit rebuild, I'm going to see that shape change and adjust to the current dimensions. Right, so this is still called the right square. I don't want to save it at this point. I want to make sure to come over to File, Save As, and we're going to do Save as Copy and Open. So since I have the right square, then I'm going to rename to the right rectangle. And I think I lost my separators, so right rectangle. So what that did, and if I tell it to keep the original document open, then when I go to my window list, I'll see the cube, the right square, and the right rectangle. At this point, I don't want to save that one, right, because it was supposed to be the square. So I don't save and overwrite it. All right, the other thing to do is from the File Explorer, if we go to our folder on the task pane, the cube and the right rectangle are the ones that are open. So you just have to be careful if you're going to reuse that you save the current, and then if I had told it not to, that little pop-up told it not to open, it probably would have just let it go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this one. We're going to look at our oblique rectangular. All right, so anytime we have an angle, we have a couple of options of how to perform those angles, and it's kind of hard to tell. I'm assuming that that is flat across the top, flat across the bottom. That those are parallel surfaces. And so if I go to a new part, and then we'll turn on the origin. And this time I want to set a line for the angle. So I left click on the origin looking for that coincident, drag it out some distance, and I'll give it a dimension. But I don't have anything to really set an angle here, so let's just make it 3 inches vertical. And since I would like to have an angle, but it doesn't really need to be an object line or a line to reference an angle to, then I will create a construction line or a center line. Right, so center line, and if I was to select that line and go to for construction, I now have pretty much the same thing as the center line, or I can toggle it off. The faster way is going to be right click and look for the pop-up to tell me it's construction geometry, let it update, construction geometry, and we'll put those in place. So since that one's horizontal, and there's an instance where I was starting to select and it found the midpoint. So I want, let's just go ahead and put a dimension. And I'll make that 2 inches. Mainly I'm just looking that my end goal is to get this fully defined. We'll talk a lot about fully defining sketches. going into the smart dimension, and the smart dimension is smart enough that when I pick two non-parallel lines, those are going to be an angle. All right, so that gives me my base. Sorry, the angle for the geometry. And then I'll go back into the top plane, open up a sketch, and notice the command manager, as soon as I go into the sketch, adjusts accordingly. So I can set this geometry independent. I can also use the geometry from the other sketch. So if I drag along until I see that little yellow box, I can make it coincident. And then I could also make it equal. So I can start building logic into my models. And there is the equal, or we come over to the side and set to equal. So it is 2 inches by 2 inches again. And using those geometric constraints, those relations, we can generate a lot of complex geometry with very little effort that is going to be stable. And if something happened that I decided that needed to be the rectangular, I would remove the equal. I can highlight it and hit delete on the keyboard, or when it is selected in the property manager, I would delete the equal length. So once we set these, they're by no means permanent, but we do have to manage them accordingly. All right, so the one little box that we don't use too often is the direction of extrusion, normal to profile. So if I were to pick that one, and then we can talk a little bit about end conditions. We've been just leaving the blind end condition. And if I were to bring that up to a vertex, which is an endpoint or an intersection, and pick that line, now I have generated a feature, a solid, that doesn't have any dimensions in this sketch. It is all driven by the layout or the geometry in sketch 1. So as I make those adjustments, sketch 1, if I were to change that to 1 inch and that to 5 inches and that to 75 on the angle, again, nothing happens, and if I OK the dimension, I see the rebuild, and I either need to hit Control B on the keyboard or go ahead and rebuild. So one thing I do want to do with the to kind of clean up my model is right-click and hide that sketch. And what that'll do is just that little shadow line from the layout sketch will go away or be hidden in the background to not be so apparent. So that was an oblique rectangular. So we'll save it and see if I can type. Closer, there we go. All right, so we're going to save this in our folder and complete out the prisms. All right, so there's a lot of ways to do these, and we'll examine some of them in the upcoming videos.